Close your eyes and breathe in the ghost of an ancient wind. Before this valley was a salt-crusted tomb. It was a garden. Imagine the dawn over Sodom, the rhythmic sound of merchants unrolling heavy silks, the smell of leavened bread wafting from stone ovens, and the chorus of children playing in streets that felt permanent, even eternal. It was a place of vibrant excess, where laughter echoed off sun-drenched walls, and the future seemed written in gold. But in a single heartbeat, the music stopped. The sky did not darken with rain. It ignited. Imagine a fire so fierce it did not just burn, it consumed the very memory of breath. Celestial brimstone, a rain of sun-eating fury, descended with a sound like the crashing of worlds. In the space of a morning, the markets, the homes, and the families were erased. Where a civilization once thrived, there was only a terrifying, heavy silence, broken by the sight of thick, black columns of smoke rising into a pale, indifferent sky. What remained was not just ash, but a haunting question that has echoed through every century since. What could be so vile, so corrosive to the soul, that it would provoke the Creator to strike a city from the map of the living? This was no sudden whim. It was the final, agonizing conclusion to a darkness that had reached the bone. To understand the fire, we must first understand the shadow that summoned it. As the sun dipped below the jagged horizon of the Jordan Valley, casting long, bruised shadows across the valley floor, two travelers approached the gates of Sodom. To the casual eye, they were mere wanderers, dusty and travel-worn. But beneath the linen of their robes, they were celestial fire structured into human form. Divine messengers sent to see if the outcry against the city was as deafening in person as it was in the ears of the Almighty. Lot, sitting at the gate, felt a shiver of ancient recognition. He didn't see just men. He felt a purity that shouldn't have existed in a place so hollow. With a desperation born of the fear that the street would swallow them whole, he pleaded with them to find sanctuary under his roof. He understood the law of the hearth, that a guest is a sacred trust, and the threshold is a boundary between life and the abyss. But the night in Sodom did not respect thresholds. The air grew thick with a rhythmic, heavy sound, the communal heartbeat of a city gone mad. From every alley and gilded courtyard they came, young men with the fire of unbridled youth, and old men with the cold calculation of a lifetime of sin. They surrounded the house like a rising tide of ink. They did not want bread. They did not want conversation. They demanded the desecration of the sacred. Through the thin wood of the door, their voices rose in a jagged chorus, demanding the strangers be brought out. On that terrible night, the mask of civilization slipped, revealing a cruelty so profound it hungered to consume the very light of heaven. The collapse began with the theft of dignity. When the two celestial messengers arrived, shrouded in the fragility of human skin, they were met with the cold hunger of a predator. As night draped the city in shadows, a mob gathered, a sea of reaching, desperate hands flickering in the orange glow of torchlight. This was the total extraction of humanity from the stranger. They had taken the sacred design of connection, that holy blueprint intended for love, and sharpened it into a weapon of dominance. In this dark street, sexuality was no longer a gift to be shared, but a tool used to strip away the sovereignty of the soul. It was the ultimate rebellion, to turn the most profound act of human vulnerability into a display of raw, predatory power. When a society begins to equate potency with the ability to degrade others, The very foundations of its existence turn to dust long before the first spark of sulfur hits the ground. The fire that fell from the heavens was the fruit of a seed planted long before the first spark touched the earth. It was a seed watered by the quiet, intoxicating poison of prosperity. We often look at the smoke of Sodom and see only the violence of the mob. But the prophet Ezekiel pulls back the veil to reveal a more subtle, shimmering rot. This was the guilt of your sister Sodom. She and her daughters had pride, excess of food, and prosperous ease. The second sin was the gilded blindfold. Sodom was not a wasteland of starving shadows. It was a paradise of overflowing granaries and silver-veined commerce. They possessed what we often pray for: full bread and prosperous ease. Yet, in the economy of the spirit, their abundance became an anesthetic. When the belly is always full and the walls are thick with stone and gold, a terrifying illusion begins to take root: the illusion of invincibility. Wealth did not just provide for their bodies. It imprisoned their souls in a fortress of arrogance. They looked at their shimmering markets and believed they were the authors of their own peace. This pride worked like a spiritual deafness, a thickening of the heart's membrane that silenced the whispers of the divine. They became strangers to their own vulnerability. In their comfort, they grew bored of holiness. In their security, they found God unnecessary. They were a people starving at a banquet table. Their spirits wasted away while they choked on the luxuries of the world. The tragedy of Sodom is the tragedy of every soul that mistakes a temporary harvest for an eternal kingdom. Behind their high walls and golden gates, they slept the sleep of the self-sufficient, never realizing that the very comfort they worshipped was the sedative that made them blind to their impending doom. In the ancient world, the threshold of a home was more than a border of stone. It was an altar. To welcome a traveler was not merely a gesture of kindness, but a sacred covenant with the divine. The hearth was a sanctuary where the stranger became a brother, protected by the laws of heaven itself. But in Sodom, the hearth was cold, and the threshold had become a trap. The third great sin of the valley was the systematic murder of hospitality. When those two celestial messengers entered the city gates, they were looking for a home. Instead, they found an arena. In a culture of light, the arrival of a guest is met with water for the feet and bread for the journey. In Sodom, the arrival of a guest was met with the sharpening of knives and the gathering of a mob. They did not see the image of the Creator reflected in the eyes of the visitor. They saw only a carcass to be scavenged, a vulnerability to be exploited. The street, which should be the artery of a community's shared life, was weaponized against the outsider. The men of the city didn't just refuse to help, they conspired to harm. By rejecting the sacred duty of the host, the citizens of Sodom were declaring that nothing was holy. Not the traveler, not the home, and certainly not the God who commands us to love the sojourner as ourselves. When a society reaches the point where it views the needy guest as a target rather than a gift, the structural integrity of that civilization has already collapsed. The fire from heaven was merely the external manifestation of a city that had already frozen over with malice. Their hands were heavy with gold, but their hearts were hollow of mercy. We often imagine the sin of Sodom as a fever of activity, a city burning with visible, aggressive rebellion. But the prophet Ezekiel peels back the tapestry to reveal a far more chilling reality: the sin of silence, the sin of the closed hand. He records that despite their abundance of food and prosperous ease, the people of Sodom did not help the poor and needy. Imagine the golden gates of the city, shimmering under a desert sun. Inside, the tables groan under the weight of imported wine and fine flour. There is laughter in the courtyards. There is the clinking of silver in the markets. But look closer. Look into the pooling shadows cast by those magnificent palaces. There, in the dust, lies the forgotten. The widow with no kin, the orphan with no bread, the traveler whose strength has failed. In Sodom, apathy was not a personal lapse, it was a communal law. The majority did not need to be violent to be wicked. They only needed to be indifferent. They walked past the suffering with eyes fixed on the horizon of their own pleasure, stepping over the broken as if they were merely stones in the street. They believed that because they were comfortable, they were favored. They believed their walls could muffle the sound of the starving. But there is a frequency of sorrow that no stone wall can dampen. Scripture teaches us that the cry of the oppressed has a unique resonance in the courts of heaven. It rises like a piercing frequency, bypassing the songs of the wealthy to reach the very ears of the Almighty. The tragedy of Sodom was a surplus of everything except compassion. They had forgotten that prosperity is not a prize to be hoarded, but a stewardship to be shared. The fire that fell from heaven was the answer to those silent screams. The heavy iron crown of Sodom's iniquity was not found in what they did, but in what they refused to become. We arrive now at the final seal of their destruction, the hardened neck. There is a terrifying threshold in the human spirit where the ears no longer hear and the heart no longer feels. This is the sin of unrepentance, the deliberate, rhythmic beating of the soul against the hand of God until the soul itself turns to stone. Mercy is not a bottomless well. It is a bridge with an end. God did not strike without warning. He allowed the intercession of Abraham to spiral down to the smallest hope, searching for a mere 10 righteous souls. He sent messengers to the very gates of the corrupt. But when light entered the city, the darkness did not just flee, it tried to consume the light. When Lot ran to his sons-in-law, his breath ragged, his eyes wide with the coming terror of the heavens, they did not tremble. They laughed. To them, the prophet of doom was merely a comedian of the absurd. They mocked the idea of a reckoning, convinced that the sun which rose yesterday would surely rise tomorrow. This is the ultimate rebellion, to stand on the edge of a volcano and joke about the heat. They had mistaken God's patience for permission, and his silence for absence. There comes a moment when the clock of divine patience strikes midnight, not because God has ceased to love, but because a city has ceased to be human. They had armored themselves in defiance, crafting a neck that would not bow and a heart that would not break. Thus, the fire did not come to change them. It came because they refused to change. The sky over the valley did not break. It dissolved. The first embers of judgment fell not as rain, but as a signature of a holiness that could no longer tolerate the rot. In the center of this celestial furnace, 4 silhouettes stumbled through the choking sulfur, their heels clicking against the stones in a frantic rhythm of survival. Beside them, invisible but firm, were the hands of the messengers, angels pulling them by the wrists as if snatching brands from a fire. The command given was not a suggestion, it was a spiritual law. Escape for your life. Do not look back, and do not stop anywhere in the valley. But behind them, lay more than just a city of sin. Behind them lay a lifetime of anchors. Lot's wife walked in the wake of her husband, her feet moving toward the mountains, but her soul remained tethered to the threshold of her home. Every step away was a tear in the fabric of her identity. She thought of the silks in her chests, the social standing in the gates, and the daughters who had laughed at the warning and stayed behind to burn. The air grew heavy with the scent of searing stone. The roar of the descending fire was a predatory thunder, yet in that moment of ultimate crisis, the physical threat was surpassed by a spiritual longing. She was a woman caught between two worlds, the mercy of the mountain and the comfort of the grave. At the 7-mile mark, the tension snapped. She turned. It was not a glance of curiosity, but a gaze of allegiance. In that heartbeat of disobedience, the judgment she longed for claimed her. The moisture of her life was instantly devoured by the heat, replaced by the mineral finality of the earth. She became a white silhouette of salt, a frozen monument to a divided heart standing alone on a plain of ash. She survived the fire, yet she became part of the ruin. Her tragedy is the silent cry echoing through the ages. What parts of us are still looking back at the fire we were commanded to leave? The smoke that rose from the valley of the Jordan thousands of years ago has never truly dissipated. It lingers in the back of the human throat, a bitter reminder that when a society rots from within, the heavens eventually answer. We look upon the salt-crusted shores of the Dead Sea and tell ourselves that this is a ghost story, a fossil of an archaic era. We believe our steel towers and digital borders protect us from the fire that fell on Sodom. But geography is no shield against the geometry of sin. Look closely at the water's edge, where the reflections of our modern world dance upon the brine. Do we not see the same 5 shadows stretching across our own streets? We live in an age where the sacred is sold for clicks, and intimacy is weaponized into a commodity, stripping the soul of its dignity, just as the mob once hammered at Lot's door. We walk through cities of glass, blinded by the fullness of bread, intoxicated by a comfort so absolute that it makes us deaf to the eternal. Our pride has become our liturgy. We worship our own reflections while the gate of the stranger remains double-bolted. The ancient sin of neglected hospitality has evolved into a global apathy. We have mastered the art of scrolling past the suffering, our hearts hardening in the blue light of our screens. The cry of the poor and the needy still rises, ignored by a world that has more than enough to share, but lacks the will to open its hand. And in our rebellion, we laugh. We mock the very idea of a moral horizon, dismissing the warnings of the past as the ramblings of a fearful age. We are building new Sodoms on the foundations of the old, convinced that because the sky is clear today, it will never rain sulfur tomorrow. The ruins of the plain are not a museum, they are a mirror. They whisper that a civilization is not judged by its wealth or its weapons, but by how it treats the most vulnerable and how it honors the creator of life. The embers of the twin cities are cold, but the warning remains white-hot. As we stand on the precipice of our own history, a haunting question hangs in the stagnant air. Are we merely survivors of the past, or are we architects of the next great silence? Are we building toward the light, or are we simply waiting for the sky to change color? We look upon the blackened craters of the valley and see only the wrath, the terrifying finality of the sulfur. But if we lean into the heat, if we listen past the roar of the descending fire, a deeper and more shocking truth begins to emerge. This was not the work of a distant, volatile tyrant. This was the work of a gardener. When a rot becomes so systemic that it threatens the very soil of the earth, the Father's greatest mercy is not to look away. It is to intervene. We must understand that the fire falling from the heavens was a surgical act of cosmic protection. Had the infection of Sodom been allowed to fester, had its predatory darkness and frozen-hearted pride spread unchecked, it would have choked the life out of every neighboring tribe, every vulnerable traveler, and every future generation. God is not a monster of vengeance. He is the protector of the holy. Sometimes, the most merciful thing a surgeon can do is remove the cancer that refuses to be healed. This intervention illustrates a profound theological principle. When grace is rejected, justice becomes the final expression of love for the victim. This is the ultimate shift in perspective. The realization that judgment is the highest form of protection for those who suffer under the boot of the wicked. God's no to the cruelty of Sodom was a thunderous yes to the dignity of the human soul. The storm was fierce, but the hand that held the fire also held the way of escape for those who would take it. Consider the negotiation that preceded the flame. We recall Abraham standing on the ridge, pleading for the cities, bargaining with the Almighty for the sake of 50, then 30, then 10 righteous souls. We usually see this as a man trying to talk a reluctant God into being kind. But look closer. God allowed that conversation. He lingered on the hillside to hear it. The intercession of Abraham was not a struggle against God's heart. It was a revelation of it. God was searching for any reason to stay his hand, hunting for even a glimmer of light in the collective dark. He did not find the 10. But even then, in the final hour, he did not simply rain fire. He sent messengers to physically grasp the wrists of the hesitant, dragging them out of the impact zone. Imagine it. A hand reaching through a rain of fire to seize a human wrist. This proves that destiny is not a matter of chance, but a matter of choice, a response to a hand that is already reaching for us. The smoke has cleared from the valley, leaving behind a silence so heavy it threatens to drown the heart. But we do not study the ruins of Sodom to become experts in ancient geography or the chemistry of brimstone. We look at the ash because the same fire that consumed the twin cities still smolders in the human spirit. The 5 sins, perversion, pride, the cold hearth, the ignored poor, and the hardened neck, did not die when the salt took the plains. They simply migrated, finding new soil in our digital plazas and our modern monuments. The altar of the heart is where we must make our stand. It is not enough to be a survivor of the storm. God does not call us merely to escape the flame, but to be transformed by the light. Lot escaped the city, but the city had already taken root in his daughters. His wife fled the streets, but her soul remained anchored to the mirrors and the gold. To walk free of Sodom is to realize that the gates we must guard are not made of stone, but of our own will. Look into the cathedral of your own soul. Is there a candle burning there, steady and defiant? Or has the oxygen been sucked out by the arrogance of full bread and unconcerned ease? We are warned to be vigilant, to refuse the apathy that allows the cry of the needy to go unheard. We are called to reclaim the sacredness of intimacy and the holy law of the guest. The story ends not with a pillar of salt, but with a lingering question that echoes across the Dead Sea. The fire of judgment is the shadow of God's love, a love that refuses to let evil reign forever. He is the gardener who cuts away the rot so the garden might live. Now, The path lies before you, stretching away from the smoking remains of what was once your comfort. The dawn is breaking, pale and promising, over the mountains. Will you look back at the ruin or forward to the dawn? The winds that sweep across the Dead Sea today carry no scent of life. They are heavy with salt, whispering over a landscape that serves as the world's most somber monument. Here, the earth itself took an oath never to forget. Where markets once bustled and pride once bloomed, there is now only the vast, echoing silence of a testimony written in ash. This is the weight of the word. It does not speak to us from a distance. It reaches out from the embers of history to touch the pulse of the present. The fire that fell on Sodom was a divine boundary drawn in the dust, declaring that there is a limit to how much darkness a heart can hold before it is consumed by its own shadow. Listen closely. Beyond the crackle of ancient flames, there is a reality that demands your attention today. The destruction of the twin cities was a tragedy, but the preservation of Lot was a promise. It is the promise that even in the center of a collapsing world, there is a hand reaching through the smoke to pull the righteous toward the dawn. The sun is rising now over the valley where the smoke once blotted out the sky. The light is soft, but it is unyielding. It asks a final question of every soul who stands on the threshold of tomorrow. We are not called to be mere survivors of the storm, but witnesses to the light that follows it. The gates of the city are behind you. The salt-crusted plains are beneath you. You must decide if you are walking toward a new life, or if you are still looking back at what was meant to burn. The silence of the salt is not just a reminder of the past. It is a call to change before the sky changes color. Do not wait for the smoke. The way out is standing right in front of you. Choose the mountain. Choose the light. Choose life while the path is still open.